Hello there. Good evening, everyone. This is Dari on WorldStreams Radio. Thank you to our listeners from all around the world for joining us tonight. To learn more about WorldStreams Radio, visit our website at worldstreams.org. Our guest tonight is Trita Parsi. Dr. Parsi was born in Iran and grew up in Sweden. He earned a master's degree in international relations at Uppsala University and a second master's degree in economics at Stockholm School of Economics, along with a PhD in international relations from Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Parsi is the author of Treacherous Alliance: The Secret Dealings of Iran, Israel, and the United States. He's a frequent commentator on Middle Eastern affairs and has appeared on BBC World News, PBS NewsHour with Jim Lair, CNN, Al Jazeera, C-SPAN, NPR, MSNBC, Democracy Now!, just to name a few. He served as an advisor to Congressman Bob Ney of Ohio on Middle East issues and is a co-founder and current president of the National Iranian American Council, a nonpartisan nonprofit organization promoting Iranian American participation in American civic life. Hi there, Saeed. Hello, Trita. Thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Well, hi there. Hello, Trita. Dr. Trita Parsi, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Dr. Parsi, my first question is going to be a very long one. And then after that, I promise you the rest of them will not. Okay, my question here is, the thesis of your book rests on some historical events that have shaped the Middle Eastern region, very much the period between 1979, the Iranian Revolution. Actually, it goes before that. But what I'm interested in is you consider this very much as an area that has a lot to do with little importance given to the ideological aspect of what is happening there. I want to know, how do you differentiate between the ideological aspect of what has happened and also the other aspects that have very much shaped the region, such as religion, systems of governance, let's say maybe class structures and so forth?
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for that question. Let me clarify one thing I think is important to understand when reading the book. I've taken the case of the relationship of two otherwise highly ideological states. Iran, which today is an Islamic republic after 1979 revolution, and Israel, which is a state that is founded based on an ideology, the ideology of Zionism. And at the same time being able to compare the nature of their relationships both before and after Iran nominally became an ideological state. And the purpose was to see and to be able to measure what is the impact of ideology on the relations between these countries. There's very few other cases that would probably be as intriguing to study as Iran and Israel, precisely because of the nominally ideological nature of these states. And what I've concluded is that the real shifts that have taken place in their relationship, and we can probably go into that in greater detail in the program, is actually coinciding and driven not by ideological shifts, but by geopolitical shifts. Now, does that mean that ideology does not matter? No, not at all. It just means that it's not the driving force of change. That is oftentimes a secondary, if at most, in being able to explain the changes that have occurred. Now, that's in its impact on foreign policy, but the impact on ideology on the cultures of the state structure, etc., is a completely different matter. and which I would, without having studied it, guess that it actually has quite a lot of an influence. But the focus of my book has been to focus solely on the foreign policy.
So exactly, that's the point. In other words, you're saying that the foreign policy of the Iranian foreign policy has nothing to do with the internal dynamics of the state. Is this what you're saying?
Not necessarily, it is not entirely, but the question is, what is the key driving force? Ideology actually is a strong pillar of Iranian foreign policy, but it's really not the driving pillar of the foreign policy, because you see that if that was the case, then the behavior of Iran towards Israel actually been quite different at various times in history. Okay. And again, we can go into the details later on, but it's very important to understand this is not a complete discounting of ideology. It is to rather show that it's not the driving force, and then study that further and see what does it mean if ideology actually is not the driving force of the foreign policy.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad that you clarified that one. Why don't we give our listeners, who are, of course, many people don't really know that much about Iran and what has Iran, the history, just a little bit of a historical synopsis that you based your book upon from the 1948, and what did that mean to the Iranian policy, whether that what Iran did was voluntary or involuntary from 1948 all the way to, say, 2003?
Sure. Well, Iran and Israel, contrary to the obvious situation that exists today, actually used to have pretty strong security cooperation in the past. It started with a doctrine that the Israelis adopted called the doctrine of the periphery. The idea that Israel's security was best achieved by creating alliances with the non-Arab states in the periphery of the Middle East in order to balance the Arab states of Israel's vicinity. And the key Arab states were Iran, Turkey, and Ethiopia. And Iran was the most important one because of its access to oil, etc. And from the Iranian side, this was reciprocated because Iran felt that Iran and Israel shared common threats. Both of them sensed a threat coming from strong Arab nationalist governments such as Egypt under Nasser or Iraq under Saddam Hussein. And both of them were very concerned about Soviet penetration in the Middle East. So this logic, the logic of the common threat, the logic of this belief that the non-Arab structure of nature of Iran would make it an ally of Israel in and of itself, drove their relationship. And it was very extensive. Iran and Israel worked very closely behind the scenes together in the 1960s and 70s. Now, there is a belief that all of this changed in 1979 with the Islamic Revolution. And indeed, in many ways, Iran did change. Iran became an Islamic revolutionary state with a very, very radical attitude, propagating regime change throughout the Middle East and trying to unseat all the different monarchies that existed there. But however much Iran changed, it did not necessarily change the geopolitical context that Iran and Israel found themselves in. Iran and Israel still faced similar threats. And from the Iranian perspective, of course, the Arab threat was no longer a theoretical one, because by 1980, Saddam Hussein invaded Iran.
Right.
And Iran had still its enmity with the Russians, with the Soviets, yet now also managed to turn the United States into an enemy because of the hostage crisis.